Great afternoon, everyone. My name is Karan Kalu, and I am the program manager for the Teach DC Early Childhood Scholarship Program, a program of the National Black Child Development Institute. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you to April's Last Thursday's virtual learning series. Today, we will celebrate Black philanthropy. The Black community has used to develop neighborhoods, build schools, and provide other vital services and resources in face of broader discrimination and segregation. Now's the time for Black philanthropy. I am so excited to introduce my colleague, Miss Allison Jones, the moderator of today's session.
Thank you so much, Karan. I'm super grateful to be on the team at NBCDI. I'm Allison Jones, Vice President for National Partnerships and Community Mobilization. I am so grateful for the opportunity to curate a rich discussion about Black philanthropy, the power of our giving. Today, as the world continues to confront a global pandemic, civil unrest, and protests for Black lives, it has truly been a challenging time in Black communities across the country. There have been shattered hopes and dreams. There has been a search for hope and an immense feeling that our community needs to be seen. And we have a right to that. We have a right to be seen, and we have a right to live and a right to experience joy and celebrate who we are. We have been out here protesting Black death, but we have also been out here investing in Black lives, from Black businesses to Black organizations, and we are here to discuss and celebrate that today. According to research and experts, Black donors often give some of the highest percentages of their incomes to philanthropic causes compared to any other racial groups. But we are not often thought of as the conventional face of philanthropy. Our spirit of giving traces back to slavery. It's rooted in family, in community, and in our shared humanity. I am absolutely thrilled to be joined by some amazing philanthropists and leaders who understand the value of Black giving and can share wisdom with us that will encourage and enlighten. We are joined by the incredible Stephen Powell, who is Chief Programs and Partnerships Officer of the National Cares Mentoring Movement, the organization that was founded by one of my sheroes, Essence Magazine's Editor-in-Chief Emeritus, Susan L. Taylor. Also a friend of NBCDI, Stephen has shared commentaries on leadership, on social justice, strategy, and of course, philanthropy. So we are super grateful for you, Stephen, being here, and we are looking forward to hearing from you. We are also honored to have Jacqueline Jones, who has an immense amount of experience and has been a teacher. She's been a researcher and a policymaker. Currently, she is president and CEO of Foundation for Child Development and also a partner and friend of NBCDI. So we're grateful to have you as well, Jacqueline.
Thank you.
And lastly, we are excited to have Miss Alelia Bundles, who has a host of accolades and honors, including being acknowledged by the New York Times, being an Emmy Award-winning producer, and this kind of success and prestige literally runs through the blood in her veins because she is also the great granddaughter of Madam C.J. Walker, who is well known as the first self-made American woman millionaire. But you will soon hear from her great granddaughter about the most important factor in legacy being what she did with her wealth rather than how she built her wealth. So we are excited to have a conversation with you also today and learn the impact your great grandmother had and her attitudes toward philanthropy. So we will actually start the discussion with just that. In every era of American history, Black people have used philanthropy in a variety of ways: for daily survival, to meet needs, to pull together resources, to care for each other, and to help each other get by. So if you think about all through history, slavery, the civil rights movement, even contemporary movements around mass incarceration and other concerns in the community, all of these are part of this tradition of giving in Black philanthropy. So I'm actually going to start with A'Lelia Bundles and ask if you could just tell us a little bit about what the history of Black philanthropy means to you and your family, and why it's such a huge part of your great grandmother's legacy. If you could just share about all of that for us.
Sure. So Allison, it's just a pleasure to be with you and all the panelists today and to be a part of NBCDI. I became familiar with the organization a couple of decades ago with the original founder, and I'm just glad to see that the organization is still thriving and doing good work. And as you mentioned, this idea of African Americans as philanthropists is something that has been with us forever, though we are not often thought of as philanthropists, and we often don't think of ourselves as philanthropists. But there are people like Valeda Fullwood and Tyrone McKinley Freeman and others, and you, who are redefining that so that we realize and take credit for the things that we have been doing for centuries. So whether it was during slavery, when we were creating mutual benefit societies, mutual aid societies, benevolent societies, pooling resources together for burial societies, we have been doing that work. A lot of it, of course, originated in church. I'm going to give like the 2-minute history of philanthropy. So, but a lot, of course, originated in church with missionary societies, with women taking leadership roles in that way. There were, of course, the various fraternal organizations, the Knights of Pythias, the Women's Auxiliary, Court of Calamity. They were taking care of widows, making sure people had enough to eat. I have to smile. I just pulled this out. This is the proceedings from an organization called the United Brotherhood of Friendship and the Sisters of the Mysterious 10 that my great-grandparents were members of. But that was very much a philanthropic and also civic organization. We've always combined our charitable giving with politics. The National Association of Colored Women, founded in 1896, was opening kindergartens and orphans' homes, but they were also involved in suffrage. So we always had more than one role to play. Fast forward to the early 1900s, the founding of fraternities and sororities, which we're all familiar with during that first and second decade of the 1900s. And of course, our graduate chapters among African Americans are much more robust than our white counterparts. We do lots of philanthropy and charity in that way. Moving forward into the 60s, the Links, the 100 Black Men, the National Coalition of 100 Black Women. And of course, during the Civil Rights Movement, there are big names that we can think of like Harry Belafonte, but there were others who were just sending those nickels and dimes and dollars in to support the folks during the Montgomery bus boycott and other kinds of initiatives. Even Ebony Fashion Fair is a form of charity, as the scholar Tanisha has just written about in Vogue, I think, or Harper's Bazaar. So even when we're socializing, we're doing philanthropy. And then we began to coalesce around groups like the Association of Black Foundation Executives. There used to be the National Center for Black Philanthropy, used to have annual conferences where the leadership of Black organizations came together. And of course, there's now Black Philanthropy Month. Tyrone McKinley Freeman, one of my dear friends, has just written the very important book focusing on Madam Walker's philanthropy, Madam Walker's Gospel of Giving. And we can point to a number of African Americans who are in leadership roles in Black philanthropic organizations, as well as places like the Ford Foundation, where Darren Walker is, and Elizabeth Alexander at Mellon. So there's a lot more to say, but that's just, I think, just to let us know we've been here all along. We've been taking leadership roles and we've been making a difference. We just need to start thinking of ourselves as doing that.
Amazing. Fraternities, sororities, organizations that my grandparents were part of, like the Links and the 100 Black Men, and many, many influencers that have these meaningful stories about giving. Can you tell us, before we move on to the next question, just a little bit about your family legacy of giving and, you know, the personal connection to that?
Sure. So Madam Walker, of course, is recognized as really one of the pioneers among African-American women in philanthropy. Most gifts had been given through the church. That still continues to be where the bulk of our philanthropy goes, to the church and to families. But Madam Walker began to flip the script a bit as she began to make money selling her hair care products, training thousands of women, when soon after she moved to Indianapolis in 1910, where she had the headquarters for her company, she contributed $1,000 to the building fund of the Black YMCA. That giving outside of church was something unusual. It was the largest gift a Black woman had ever given, because she had been very poor growing up and she had benefited from the kindness of women at St. Paul African Methodist Episcopal Church. And we know the AME Church has a long tradition of activism and philanthropy. As she began to become prosperous, she turned around and gave back to her community. She realized that at her annual convention, at her first annual convention in 1917, 200 women came from all over the United States, the Caribbean, and Central America. And they were there to talk about making money and selling products. But she said to them, your first duty is to humanity. I want others to look at us and realize that we care not just about ourselves, but about others. And she gave prizes not just to the women who sold the most products, but to those who had given the most to charity. And as we often have done, we combining our business, our philanthropic efforts, and our activism. At the end of the convention, the women sent a telegram to President Woodrow Wilson urging him to support legislation that would make lynching a federal crime. So Black Lives Matter 1.0. She participated in the silent protest parade. She was on the executive committee of the NAACP in New York after the East St. Louis massacre. And just before she died, she pledged $5,000 to the NAACP's anti-lynching fund. So philanthropy was very important to Madam Walker as a way of giving back because she had benefited from the kindness of others. And of course, that's continued, you know, through the generations. I don't have millions to give away, but I try to do the best I can.
And how remarkable is it that you can now share that story and build on your family legacy? I know she's very proud of you. Madam CJ Walker was definitely an influencer in her heyday and even now. And so, Stephen, that prompts me to turn to you because you represent an amazing organization that has a founder who is most certainly an influencer and is known as one of the most influential Black women in journalism, Susan Taylor. And, you know, I would love to hear from you just a little bit about why philanthropy, especially philanthropic efforts from influencers in our society, is so important. They have such a following, such a responsibility. And just talk to us a little bit about that.
So before I start, I just want to echo Ms. Bundle's spirit of gratitude coming in to thank you, Allison, and the National Black Child Development Institute team for having me. It's wonderful to be among this panel. It makes me feel like home, where I'm surrounded by amazing women and I'm just trying to do what I'm trying to do. So let me talk a little bit about the amazing Susan Taylor and why being an influencer is so critical in the space of philanthropy. What Susan has done masterfully over the years is that she understands that with a great platform comes great responsibility. She's been able to harness her power of celebrity to influence others to take care of our community. And just thinking about the origin of the National Cares Mentoring Movement, we started on the heels of the wake of Hurricane Katrina. The pain and devastation created by Hurricane Katrina really moved Susan's spirit to say, what can our community do as a call to action to help recover those that were in New Orleans, but also around the country. And so since that point, Susan created this call to action. This is what she's done masterfully over the years. And when you think about what she was doing when she was at Essence Magazine for 37 years, she always had her ear to the community, listening to the needs and wants of Black women, but also just the community at large. So the first call to action was for members around the country to step in and serve as mentors to their communities, really a call to action for African Americans. And we had a lot of volunteers step up, what we call our affiliate leaders. And their job is to recruit, train, and engage African-American mentors to deploy them to other organizations that are in need. So we work in partnership with other organizations, but it should be noted that our 58 affiliates in 26 states are all volunteers. So they're using the space of philanthropy being around time and talent to give back to their community. Susan also leveraged her Rolodex to convene a wonderful brain trust to help build our healing framework, which is called A New Way Forward, Healing What's Hurting Black America. This is our guiding, culturally anchored healing framework that we bring into community. And it's also a curriculum that we also bring into school. I definitely want to just echo something that Harry Belafonte, one of the 60 Brain Trust members, he mentioned. We can't heal what's hurting our community until we heal what's hurting ourselves. And if we look in our history, we see where Harry Belafonte played a significant role in philanthropy, just helping to support many leaders during the civil rights movement. So Susan was able to leverage her Rolodex to do this as well. But then also, now that we've actually expanded our program to not just do mentor recruitment and deployment, because we are the nation's leading organization that's doing this work, we've also built our own group mentoring programs around the country, 2 group mentoring programs that support young people in schools, and then 2 group mentoring programs that support adults in community. We have our Rising, Elevating Education and Self-Esteem program in schools around the country where we facilitate wellness circles. Using our curriculum, it starts with heritage, it talks about spirituality, it talks about building community, going right back to that point that Harry Belafonte said, we can't heal what's hurting our community until we heal what's hurting ourselves. We also have an HBCU Rising STEM mentoring program in Atlanta, where we target STEM majors at Clark Morehouse and Spelman colleges to mentor students in the Atlanta public schools. This is also a reminder to us that in order to really elevate philanthropy, we have to take care of our Black institutions. And I'm going to just give a huge shout out to my beloved Howard University at this moment, but we have to rethink how we support those Black institutions. We also charge our affiliate leaders with hosting community wellness and wealth building circles in their communities. So getting back to that space of creating giving circles is really paramount to us moving the conversation around philanthropy and understanding that we don't have to be millionaires to give back to our community. And then also in Atlanta, we have a program called University for Parents, where it's a workforce development program. We can't do anything around philanthropy without really attacking generational poverty. So that's really core to our work. And Susan has been masterful at doing all of this. And I just want to point out one last thing that she's also done very well. She's leveraged, she reached out to celebrities to do a PSA to support our program. So there's a role for everyone to play. You don't have to be a celebrity. Susan is a unique person where she can work the boardroom and the boulevard, right? But it doesn't mean that everyone has to do that. She just recognized what her gift was to this contribution in this space.
Amazing. And both you and Alelia brought up some really important points that I just want to re-highlight. The importance of people working together, the importance of leveraging our contacts and our relationships. You can do that if anyone can do that. You don't have to be a millionaire. And then also the importance of giving, not just your treasure, but also your time and your talent. And so I appreciate you all sharing that. I think there is a clear example that should be set, and we should all use our platforms. It's interesting now because we are in a time where we all have a platform. Everybody has either a Facebook page or a Twitter or an Instagram. And no matter how big or small you're following, you want to use that to impact who you can and do what you can to really begin to create change in our communities, change narratives, encourage people to give. And so one of the things, and I want to make sure to get to this, at the National Black Child Development Institute, we live by doing what we can to create and bring about change. And Jacqueline Jones, one of our panelists at the Foundation for Child Development, your focus is advancing and the learning and development of young children. And so this is very familiar to NBCDI's work. It's very similar because our work is focused on advancing the quality of life for Black children and families. Jacqueline, can you share with our audience how important it is for our society to recognize the importance of giving to causes that particularly focus on early childhood development and early success?
Thank you, Allison, so much for inviting me to join this very powerful panel. I represent a foundation, and I am a Black Foundation executive these days, which is an honor. And I think for us as folks who are really interested in young children, it gives us a unique stance to be able to support the lives and welfare of young Black children. We have a solid body of research that confirms the importance of the first 5 years of life. This is the most rapid period of brain development in our life cycle. The experiences and relationships in this early period matter. They matter for lifelong learning and for well-being. Black children are born with all the potential and promise of every other child. However, we must ensure that they have experiences and interactions that buffer them from and build resistance to the harmful consequences of racism, prejudice, discrimination, and poverty. I believe that we need to support the continuum of Black life in this country and around the world. But if we get it right at the beginning, in the early years, then we're giving our children, our culture, our country a better chance. As my beloved friend, the late Asa Hilliard, was fond of saying, we can foster and develop the genius in every child. And that genius is there. We must believe it, and we must know it. And that begins with honoring and the wonder and the curiosity of our children as we prepare them for the good and the hostile in the world. So programs that adopt this kind of mission, support young children, need support. And I think it's our duty as Black people to do everything we can to help in this very challenging work. We have lived with the notion that the problem is located within the child. And you've heard terms of lazy, aggressive, limited ability. Rather, I would propose, and I think the research is clear, the problem is very much outside of the child, in the context, the society in which children find themselves. So the Foundation for Child Development is dedicated to supporting research that tells the full story of young children's experiences and the ways in which societal factors can support or hinder their development. We do not fund research for its own sake. We fund research that we hope will have policy implications to change the lives of children through policy and through practice. We have focused for some time now, about 6 years, on the adults in children's lives who work every day to make their lives better. This is the early childhood workforce. That workforce of folks who work with children from birth to age 8 is 40% women of color. They are not well prepared always. They are not always well compensated, and they are not always supported. So that is our mission, to look at professionalization of the field, the ways in which we can not just highlight who they are and what they do, that is important, but make sure that that work is honored and compensated. To ask someone to work full-time and work hard to support our children, and to have what we know is not even a living wage. We have folks working full-time and who are on public assistance. That is a social justice issue that we must deal with in this country. And so we have worked to see the ways in which we can increase compensation, the ways in which we can increase better preparation for this workforce. But one of the things we've really looked at are our researchers themselves. And it took us a little while to realize that we were not doing a good enough job in supporting African-American researchers. And I think it's important to think about the perspective that African-American researchers bring to their work. They bring their lived experience. And so the questions they ask, the ways in which they want to understand young children come from within their own experiences, and they can ask different questions. And in research, sometimes the question is as important as the answer that you find. And so we have dedicated a good deal of our work to enhancing the numbers of Black researchers that we can support, thinking about ways in which we can increase the funding for the kind of research that they would like to do, which is not always looking at an established data set and figuring out how to analyze it, but asking new questions, asking why we see the data that we see, asking how they can understand these interactions across teachers and children and parents and how they can make children's lives better. So our work is very much targeted to figuring out how we can help these researchers use their empirical data that often comes from questions of their own lived experience and have an impact on policy. I think as we think about what folks can do, to me, it is understanding the issue, supporting the work, advocating, and of course, voting. But I think that we have to think about young children as the promise that we have. Without that promise, then we as a people have really given up. My great-grandfather was born enslaved. And I often think if he could see the life that he's provided for the generations that followed, I hope he would be pleased. But his hard work is what got all of us here. And I think we have to take that perspective with young children. So organizations like NBCDI that focus on Black children are really focusing on our future and our legacy and everything that should be important to us.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I think giving where it all starts is so important to think about. When it comes to legacy, you automatically begin to think about your children and those that are going to come behind us. And so an investment in early childhood has a guaranteed return. And so I'd like to open this up a bit and discuss this question, because I believe both personally and professionally, just hearing the passion that each of you have around this topic, I think everyone will have tokens of wisdom for this particular question. And so according to research, Black giving still represents billions, which is amazing. How do we ensure that the younger generations continue this trend? And anyone can answer.
I'm gonna jump right in. I can't be here for mentoring and not talk about the need for intentional mentorship in this space. What's core to our work is when we talk to our young people, we teach them to be the authors of their future. And I think a large part of really deepening how we move in philanthropy is that we have to have a corrective narrative about what's really taking place. And so, Allison, you referenced the billions. There was a study that was done by the Kellogg Foundation and the Rockefeller Philanthropic Advisors back in 2012 that stated that we spent upward of $11 billion towards community-based organizations in a year. That's 25% of typical household income. And when you look at where we give those donations, it's primarily to higher education, it's to our arts education organizations, Black-led organizations, and also to our faith communities. Mm-hmm. So for our young people who now have an opportunity to really see a world where social justice is, the issues are pressing, and they now understand the power that they have utilizing social media, I think it's important to have intentional mentorship in the home first and then out in the community. When I talk to my daughters about why giving Black is so important, I always talk about supporting Black businesses, right? And then we have this thing, TGIF. You have to have trust, you have to have grace, extended grace, you have to be intentional about investing, and then you have to have faith. A lot of times when we have issues, we go, oh my God, this Black business, we have to unlearn some of those behaviors and some of those language and really talk about how do we communicate with each other lovingly to help move the culture forward. It's not about individualism, it's about moving the culture forward. So we're not looking for perfection, we're looking for forward movement. Right. So that intentional mentorship inside the home and an intentional mentorship in schools and in the community is critical.
So Allison, I would just to expand on what Stephen's saying, definitely what happens at home and mentoring is very important. And there, it is really wonderful to see examples of young people who have taken those lessons to heart. I love these stories of young kids who are collecting clothes, who are collecting food, who are putting together a drive for a prom dress with someone who can't have it. But one wonderful example that comes to mind is Michaela Ulmer, the young sister who created the iced tea company in Austin. And she started that with the encouragement of her parents and quickly went to the idea of making sure that part of her profits are going to charity, or going to philanthropy. So there are, I think for young people, oftentimes it is much easier to have them pay attention to another young person. So we need to lift up those role models who are the same age as some of the people who need to be learning philanthropy.
You know, as someone who came of age in the 60s, I am so proud of the young people who are out there looking at these big issues in our society, not saying, what can I do, but really making sure their voices are heard, and heard in a very powerful and impactful way. And I think that thinking about these issues is a start, but really looking at the organizations that are doing work and seeing if you can connect to that mission. Does that mission strike you? Does that mission resonate with what you are about? And if it does, then what can you do? It can be perhaps sending a check, but it can also be calling up some organization and saying, can I support you? What do you need? How can I be there? So I think there are multiple ways in which we as a people have tried to support each other. And I think with a generation of young people who are literally hitting the streets, that it really comes to thinking about, what is my role? Where is my place? What can I do now? You may be able to do some things later on in life that include a check, but maybe that's not the case right now. But that's okay. You can be someone who has a powerful influence on an organization if you just figure out what it is that they need. And I think asking them, what do you need?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just about, millionaires and billionaires. It's about you and me. And, if you're an usher at your church and you welcome people into service every week and encourage them to give during giving time to, the community pot, you're a philanthropist. If you volunteer as a coach and you pour yourself into those young people and you give your time every week, you're a philanthropist. If you're part of a giving circle that pulls resources together, like-minded people, you guys want to start a scholarship at your old school, or you provide some other service to the community, you are a philanthropist. And so, I tell my friends to join NBCDI. If you join and donate $5 a paycheck and encourage your friends to do so on social media, you're a philanthropist. So we can all be part of this movement. And I think throughout history, that's what we were seeing, this collective action. And so just in talking about that and working together, how important is collective impact to achieving success, especially in our community? How can we do a better job with our partnerships and working together? And that's open for anyone.
I'll start. I think I have been incredibly heartened to see philanthropy really try to engage in much more collaborative work. I think what we've learned is no matter how big the endowment, the problems are so big that no single foundation is going to solve these problems. And so there are collectives and collaboratives of foundations popping up that I think are really quite remarkable. We belong to one. It is an 8-foundation collaborative that is targeted its work to closing the achievement gap by supporting the early childhood workforce. And as I think about sitting at the table with Buffett, Bezos, Gates, Heisen, Simons, Packard, all those guys, it is really interesting that it is not the level of your endowment that matters as far as your voice in that collective, but it is how can we as folks who have resources use those resources to support the work that we all think is important. It may not be the only work that we have in our foundations, but for this moment in this collective, we are targeting and we're having a laser focus on work. And I think that's, I think we have much more of an understanding of the power of that. And another thing I think we have much more of an understanding of as we think about ways to organize is much more of an understanding that the voices of the community really must be lifted. For a long time, philanthropy was, we've got the resources, here's what we're telling you to do with it, or maybe we can support folks in some way, but the voices of the community indicating what they need and being partners in the philanthropic process has really become something very important. And I'm just thrilled to see that.
Yeah, I am also. Community listening sessions, looking at, unconventional places that are not institutionalized, like block clubs and church groups and neighborhood groups, and listening to them. I think that's so vital. Anyone else want to share just about the importance of collective impact?
So I can add a couple of things, and this sort of expanding this definition of philanthropy to activism and even to historic preservation. We can see the power of Ken Frazier, the CEO of Merck, and Ken Chenault, the former CEO of American Express, when they raised their voices as powerful members of corporate America to make people pay attention to voting rights. So that has a big impact on our finances. It has a big impact on generational wealth, whether we vote, what kinds of rights we have. So that's one way, but they are also people who have given time and treasure because they have been in a position to do so. I would also say that that historic preservation of our Black historic sites is very important. I grew up in Indianapolis. The Madam Walker Legacy Center, the Walker building that was built in 1927 is there. And that is a neighborhood that really, as many inner city neighborhoods, was destroyed by highway construction, by the building of a university there. But members of the community have created a movement to try to preserve the neighborhood. And I've been part of a group that has pushed back on some of the development. And really, we have rallied the entire community around that. And so I think we have, our philanthropy comes in many forms.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to go ahead and add, because Ms. Bundles and Dr. Jones have named a few of these organizations, but I think it also means understanding that one entity can't do it all. In order to be purposeful, we have to be egoless. I believe that ego sometimes gets in the way of forward progress. So to be, just the fact that I'm on this webinar is because of our partnership with the National Black Child Development Institute, but our other national community impact partners like the Association of Black Psychologists, the Links, 100 Black Women, Jack and Jill of America, a Phi Beta Sigma fraternity, our fraternal and sorority organizations. We have to show our children that we have to link arms and aims to move this work forward. It's not about one entity, it's about moving together as one unit. So there can be multiple tribes in this Wakanda of philanthropy. So.
Yes, Stephen, I just want to pick up on your notion of egoless, which in philanthropy, it's a little, you want your foundation to be the one that has done the work. And one of the things that I'm just thrilled about is the notion of letting that go, of saying as a collective, we're gonna work by consensus. We're gonna work until everybody feels comfortable that this is what they need to do, but it's not one foundation doing it. I think you're right. It is getting rid of that ego and really focusing on the collective.
And like I told you yesterday, Dr. Jones, we're gonna figure out a way how to work together. And the same goes for you, Ms. Bundles.
No way to find me.
That's the work. Mm-hmm.
It is. And with that being the work, I think we'll have these conversations, they'll be rich. Folks will leave and say, wow. And then when it's time to organize and strategize, it's like sometimes we don't know what those next steps are. And so, one of the questions that I sent out in advance was just, how do we organize? How do we focus this and really create strategy so that we can make the largest impact? I think there are so many components to this. The first piece is super important. Jacqueline Jones just shared it, which is listening to the community, making sure that we have ways to listen to the community, whether it be grassroots organizations or, like I said, unconventional groups of people that we can listen to that may not necessarily be an institution, but it's a group of people in neighborhoods that we can listen to make sure that what we're doing, they're in the center of it, right? And that it makes sense. And so what are some ways to best organize and really focus this versus just saying, yes, let's all work together, which is great. What are the next steps after that?
I don't have a lot to say, but I'll just say this: play your position. You know, I think that it's important for people to stay in their lane. We don't have to pretend to do something or know something that we don't. And this goes back to the importance of partnership. It should also be noted, as Black organizations, we don't have the opportunities to make the mistakes that others may, right? So we want to make sure that every step is important. We're linking arms and aims or understanding what roles each person can play, but really just focusing on what you do best is really critical.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we started one of our collaboratives with other funders by saying, what would success look like in 5 years? What's our goal? Why are we all sitting here? If we do our work well, 5, 10 years from now, what will happen? And that was very helpful, because as Stephen says, you don't want to play outside of your lane. So if we can envision a North Star for this work, what are the ways in which each of us can contribute to getting there? And it doesn't have to be the same way, but can we create a kind of roadmap for getting there? Now, things will happen and plans will change, because that's the nature of plans, but that's okay, as long as you've got a plan, you've got a goal, I think a North Star is really important to just figure out what is it that we think we can do, and then think about what are the points of leverage. What is it that can make a difference, that really can get us to where we want to go? It takes some thought. It's hard. It takes listening to other thoughts, other perspectives, figuring out how you can come to an agreement. But if you're going to connect with other people, then everybody's ideas have to be respected and have to be listened to, and figuring out for the collective, what is the best route to get to where we want to go? How do we reach our North Star?
And thank you for listening, and thank you for being a leader in this movement. You know, as a funder of NBCDIs, your organization has proven the fact that you value and you want to also advance the lives of Black children and families. So thank you for that. And thank you, Stephen, for being a longtime friend and partner of NBCDIs. We certainly appreciate that. And we look forward to continuing our partnership with you all, and Ms. Bundles as well. One of the other things that I was just, thinking about when we were preparing for this, and again, I'm so grateful for each and every one of you, was what we should be focusing on to really get our community to a place of success. And one of the things that kept bubbling up was workforce development. And so I just wanted to, touch on that for a moment and see, if you all could just offer a little bit of wisdom as we begin to think about some of the causes we should be looking at, some of the things and approaches that we should be taking. And I feel like, of course, early education is vital, but also workforce development. And so if you all could just talk a little bit about that. And Ms. Bundles, especially, I know throughout history, that's been a really important piece, getting people employed and making sure that they have sustainable wages. So if you all could just talk a little bit about that, we would love to hear.
I can start with that, but I'm sure that Stephen and Jacqueline have a lot to add on specifics. But clearly, one of the things that Madam Walker recognized is that, yes, she had created a hair care product that thousands of women could sell and use, and that was great. But she realized that the women who were her customers might have wanted a hair care product and needed it, but what they really needed was education and jobs and income. And she helped them become economically independent so they could buy homes and educate their children. And when she sort of infused this idea of political activism at that convention in 1917, that carried forward into the 1960s when beauticians who owned their own businesses, didn't have to go to work for somebody else, were able to help pay for the buses that took people to the March on Washington in 1963. But it is that idea of creating generational wealth, that some of the homes that people bought now are worth something. Of course, we know redlining, sort of destroyed some of our wealth through the years. But in addition to workforce development, I think it's also important to look at entrepreneurship in our communities. The New Voices Fund, which was created by Richelieu Dennis after he sold his company that he founded, Shea Moisture, to Unilever. He bought Essence, as many people know, and also created a $100 million venture capital fund that's now overseen by Melissa Bradley, called New Voices Fund. The YWCA in Chicago has entrepreneurship programs. There, Walker's Legacy, another group, but there are many of these organizations that are really focusing on women's entrepreneurship. And during the pandemic, as many people have lost jobs or decided to leave jobs, they have started businesses. So I think that is really how we create wealth, which then allows us to set examples for children and also creates the opportunity to be able to contribute some of that wealth to important causes.
So we've focused on the early childhood workforce, and I think, for 40 years, we've collected data on the status of the early childhood workforce, those people who work with young children. And I think what we've learned is that the issue is valuing the work and paying people for the work. It's not finding people who want to do the work. And then we look at the workforce now, and as I said earlier, it's over 40% women of color. And so we have a long history of women of color caring for other people's children, sometimes to the detriment of their own children, certainly not as a respected work, and trying to make a living. I think their work has two issues. As a country, I don't believe we have a good deal of value that we place on work with children. And I think we certainly have issues around women and paying women what they deserve. So this work is at the intersection of gender and race and undervalued work. And so this workforce finds itself in a very challenging position, except that during the pandemic, they were suddenly essential services. Now, it is, to me, just an irony of the English language that you can be simultaneously essential and undervalued. It's fascinating. So here they are, and we have data that indicates that from March of 2020, when the pandemic began, and September of 2020, 166,000 early childhood workforce jobs were lost. 166,000 jobs gone. They may come back. We have new legislation, new proposals from Washington, and we'll get some of those back, but we're going to lose a lot. And a lot of those jobs are women entrepreneurs who have family childcare centers, or they're running their private provider settings. And they're desperately trying to be entrepreneurs. And yet, when those PPP loans came out, suddenly the banks didn't know them very well. They didn't have the connections to get what they needed. And so I think we've got to look at this issue of workforce development in very different terms, because for a long time we thought if we could just collect the data and make it clear what the situation was, everything would be fine. And that's not the case. I think this is a time when we've got to support these folks in particular in, again, lifting their voices and seizing their own power. And if they are essential, then let's see what happens when essential services really show who they are. I think there can be a moment when you can internalize some of this lack of value. You've been there for such a long time doing this work that's underpaid, that you can start to feel like that's okay. It's going to always be that way. It can't always be that way. It is a social justice issue, and I think it needs to be something that we focus on very carefully. If we don't have the adults in professional roles who know how to care for our children, then I don't know how we're going to support our children and our families. So that's our workforce vision. And again, I think it includes getting out the data, but it's more than that. It's really figuring out how organized political action can give our folks the justice that they deserve.
Absolutely. It's about policy and practice. And NBCDI's policy team is super focused in that same area. And I think that when you're talking about early educators, it's a group that's often isolated, but we need them all the time. Even today, I needed an early educator to help me with my daughter so I could be on this Zoom. And so I just so appreciate your sentiments and what you shared. Stephen, do you have anything you'd like to add before we move on?
I mean, I'm just echoing the brilliant points that have already been made. One point that I would add is that the North Star for post-secondary success looks different for everyone. So I think the conversations around what that looks like for our children has to be really thought about. We don't celebrate trades enough anymore. And a lot of it's very difficult to get into a philanthropic space if you're buried in debt. And so when we're preparing mentors to engage with the young people, one of the things we're letting them know is that you have to be an active listener, and it's about finding out what that young person wants to do, not about what you want to do. We have tons of young people who may not fit into a four-year college. Maybe they need to be in a trade school or certificate program and can build wealth that way. So just understanding that the North Star looks different for everyone, and then also providing opportunities and critical conversations for young people to be able to deal with the traumas that they may experience when they go into the workforce, right? The microaggressions, this whole notion of the imposter syndrome. So giving them what the Association of Black Psychologists says, make sure that we culturally inoculate them before they get into those spaces to be strong and proud and powerful when they get there.
Yeah, that's super important. And we have to consider all of that when we are thinking about Black children in particular, and Black youth in particular. We have a different background. We have a different set of notions and experiences that we are coming into things with. And so I'm so glad that you pointed that out.
Allison, if I may, I just want to address Stephen's point again. You know, with the Bezos Foundation, we are looking at developing a research agenda around the development of racial identity in young children, young African-American children, in particular, children of color. And it was so interesting when we started not something that we have really studied. And so just to show you what it's like to actually call on the community, we coordinated with state officials, but also with parents and researchers to talk about what this meant. And parents of young children are saying, they're asking us these questions and we don't know how to answer them. So I think the notion of buffering children and onward to adolescence against what we know will be the inevitable issues around racism and discrimination and microaggressions is such a critical piece of work that we have to engage in if we want our young people to be able to succeed and come out whole.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So I was just pinged that we have 6 minutes left. This has been so rich.
No pressure, right?
It's okay. We can keep going. I just wanted to, before we close, I wanted to ask each of you to be very personal. And if you could just share why you give to worthy causes and you know, why our collective giving will continue to make an impact on our communities. And so I'll share, for me, this is important to me. It's very personal to me because, you know, my family had to take advantage of organizations that were helpful. And I grew up in what you could call a disenfranchised community. And so I have this personal experience and connection to giving. My mother would open up our home and serve meals to people and allow kids to come over. And that was philanthropy, right? And so for me, it's very personal. And it's important for me to give to worthy causes. And so if you each could just talk about why this is personal to you and what your journey looks like.
I'll start. I was born and raised in Harlem, and it was at a time when it was incredibly economically diverse because there weren't opportunities outside of Harlem to live and work and that kind of thing. So I remember that I went to a Catholic school. I went to 12 years of Catholic education, only because my parents didn't trust the public schools. And every year at the end of the school year, my mother would take my books across the hall to our neighbors who went to public school and were a grade ahead of me. And she would give them my books so that they would have reasonable textbooks. And there was something so wrong about that situation in which going to school was not equal, and they were having such a hard time. And I just felt incredibly blessed to be able to be in a place where people felt comfortable. I mean, they said that I was getting a good education. I believe them, you know, it was cool, but it wasn't the case. And as I walked around, I knew that things were not equal. And that's within that community. And it's always been just tremendously important to me to be able to have that opportunity to give something, whatever it could be, if it could help in some way. And certainly the lives of young children have become a professional focus. But I think it is, for people of color in this country, it is essential to me that we do whatever we can to make those lives easier in some way.
So I will just say, obviously with Madam Walker, that's a great, great role model. But the truth is, we did not sit around the dinner table talking about Madam Walker. It was with me, it's my parents and the example that they set. My mother was vice president of the Madam C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company when I was growing up. My dad was president of another Black hair care company, but they were both very involved in civic organizations, community organizations. And so I saw their example of what they did and the leadership roles that they played. And that really carried to me when I was in high school, involved in organizations, in college, doing things. But certainly as I've been an adult, I realized just, how many blessings I've had and the opportunity to be in leadership roles in organizations, in nonprofit organizations. And so I think that my focus, my philanthropic focus, is education. And I've just been drawn to it because I benefited so much from the schools that I attended. And I've seen an opportunity to be able to give back. My philanthropy is also kind of it's time, treasure, talent, and now we say testimony to add to that. It's just trying to do some mentoring with young people, to be available. I love talking to students and helping them with their reports on Madam Walker, or just talking about journalism and setting an example on the things that I learned in a 30-year career. So those are the personal causes that are important to me.
Thank you.
I'm gonna be calling you Miss Bundles. I just waited for you to set that up.
Stephen, in about 30 seconds.
It's cultural and spiritual for me. I just feel like when you're blessed, you bless others. Born in Newark, raised in East Orange, both of my parents were Caribbean immigrants, but our house was constantly filled with gratitude. So I'm just giving back to those who poured into me. It's really that simple.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much. Everyone, thank you for joining us. I'm going to ask you to please look at the screen because you should see NBCDI's website and social handles. Get in contact with us, follow us, join the movement. As a Black community, I believe we are committed to continuing the legacy of funding our own survival and providing help and hope where we can. We will continue making an impact on the world with our immense sense of community. We will close the gaps to equal footing. We will conquer poverty and inequity, and we will realize our power and own it. And we will do this together. Thank you for joining us.
you.